Class is back in session, students. You've decided to attend Menopause University, and you will find that this education serves you well for the rest of your life. If you've been a student here for a while or have watched all these videos in order, you are at the point of knowing 90% more than most physicians. I guarantee that. Menopause is the most neglected topic on planet Earth. So you can't assume that your doctor knows this stuff. Most do not. There is no education on menopause in medical school. And four-year OB-GYN residency programs devote only 1% of the 4 years to menopause. So you absolutely have to rely on me for this education. I'm the first and the only person to have ever given women an actual education on menopause. So take advantage of this opportunity to get the education you deserve so that you can advocate for yourself and manage your menopause your way. Because this is a real education, I cover all the material in units, and it is absolutely critical to watch every single video and all of them in order if you want to understand everything. That's why I always orient you to where we are in the lessons. Right now, we are embarking on the topic of epithelial ovarian cancer. It started in video number 413, and this is video number 438. So, there are 25 videos that precede this one in this unit alone. This particular video is on the grading and staging of epithelial ovarian cancer. If you've been watching all my videos in order, you already know the terms grading and staging. If you haven't been watching all my videos in order, there's no telling what you know, or don't know, or think you know, but don't know. Either way, by the end of this video, you will know about the grading and staging of epithelial ovarian cancer. Now, I do not go into the details of grading and staging in my book. You will find that all these videos cover more material than what you can get in my book, and that I cover everything more deeply here. I like to give you a little review in order to frame your thinking for each video. So here's the review for this one. Epithelial ovarian cancer is not very common, but it is very deadly. The reason it's so deadly is that we do not detect it early enough to treat it in its early stages. So it ranks as one of the most deadly cancers. This is the case for a few reasons. First, the symptoms of epithelial ovarian cancer are GI and GU rather than GYN symptoms that appear late in the course of the disease. Second, there is no screening test worthy of evaluating all women. Third, there is no risk assessment tool for women with ovarian swellings that do not attempt to force two wrongs into being one right test. So typically the diagnosis is made only at the time of actual surgery. And the surgery itself serves three purposes. It confirms that you have cancer, it designates the grade of your cancer, and it determines the stage of your cancer. Well, the grade and the stage of your cancer are the topics for this video. And you will be very disappointed when you learn the true state of affairs regarding the grading and staging of most epithelial ovarian cancers. Grading and staging really constitute ranking. It's like the class ranking of students with regard to school performance. Together, they form a system for comparing epithelial ovarian cancer to other cancers. And that's what results in my saying that it's ranked most deadly. Together, grading and staging also serve to label your cancer in a way that places you into a category for treatment and prognosis. But separately, they focus on two completely different things. Grading is microscopic. while staging is macroscopic. And both microscopically and macroscopically, epithelial ovarian cancer ranks as most deadly. So let's address them individually. Our first topic is grade. Grade refers to the degree of abnormality of the cancer cells. Grade is all about how the cancer behaves. It designates its personality in terms of how aggressive it is. And it really depends on the type of cell that became cancerous in the first place. So grade designates the behavior of individual cells on a microscopic level. Now, there are many different ways to classify the grade of a cancer. And anytime there's more than one way to classify something, it sets the stage for confusion. Well, as your teacher, I refuse to confuse you. So I like to point out instances in which differing terminology can actually refer to the very same thing. And it turns out that there are different classification schemes for microscopic grading of an epithelial ovarian cancer. But if you don't know that they all refer to the same thing, you can get very confused. I'm going to designate all the different classification schemes for grading of epithelial ovarian cancer so that you can see how they compare. And since we're going to designate different grading classification schemes, let's chart them as we go along. That way you'll realize that they are different classification schemes for the very same thing. So here's the skeleton of the chart we'll use to illustrate the grading of epithelial ovarian cancer. Here's the beginning of our chart. The top row designates the three general categories of epithelial ovarian cancer: mild, moderate, and severe. And as we discuss each classification scheme, we'll add each one to the chart so that you can see their differences and their overlaps. The most basic classification scheme for an epithelial ovarian cancer is by its level of aggression. Grading based on level of aggression is exactly what you would expect. It designates the personality of the individual cells based on whether their behavior is mildly aggressive versus moderately aggressive versus very aggressive. So this is the simplest grading scheme to understand. So we'll start our chart with this simple grading classification scheme based only on aggression. All I've done is fill in the cells for each of the three levels of aggression. Okay, the second and more common classification scheme is by degree of differentiation. This is the classification scheme you have seen with all the other cancers we've studied thus far. Differentiation describes how different the cancer cells are from the normal cells of the same type. And differentiation correlates perfectly well with the level of aggression. In many ways, the word differentiation is just the medical term for aggression. And just as there are three levels of aggression, there are also 3 degrees of differentiation: well differentiated, moderately differentiated, and poorly differentiated. Well differentiated cells are very close in appearance to the normal parent cell and can still perform their functions. Moderately differentiated cells are halfway between a perfectly normal parent cell and a severely abnormal cell, and they may or may not perform their functions. Poorly differentiated cells are so unlike the normal parent cell that they are difficult to recognize as a particular cell type at all, and they no longer perform their normal functions. These are the most aggressive. Differentiation is purely microscopic. You cannot designate the degree of differentiation without examining the tissue microscopically. So differentiation is something the pathologist determines after the surgical procedure that confirms a diagnosis of epithelial ovarian cancer. You cannot know it beforehand. So let's add this to our chart. All I've done now is place well, moderately, and poorly differentiated in the respective cells corresponding to their level of aggression. As you've discovered, one of the things that makes epithelial ovarian cancer so deadly is that it requires a major surgical procedure to merely make the diagnosis. And this is yet another reason that it ranks as most deadly. And this has made doctors look for any means of designating the grade before surgery. One of these is by consistency of the contents of the ovarian swelling. I introduced you to this in video number 417 on the different kinds of ovarian swellings. There you learn that ovarian swellings can range from fluid to solid with all sorts of things in between. And since the consistency of a macroscopic ovarian swelling is something evident on ultrasound, it is possible to use the consistency to predict the degree of aggression or differentiation, and thus the likelihood of malignancy. Fluid swellings are called simple cysts. Simple cysts are normal cysts that are filled with clear fluid, like this, just fluid. Simple cysts are the least likely to be malignant. A second level is called homogeneous. A homogeneous ovarian swelling contains a uniform substance throughout the entire swelling. It can have a consistency anywhere from solid to liquid, and it can be thin or thick in consistency. And while simple cysts are homogeneous, the word homogeneous is used to indicate a consistency that is more worrisome than a simple cyst. Typically, it indicates that the fluid is something other than clear. It can be like this, with fluid that is still detectable as fluid and still fairly thin, but it's just not clear. Or it can be like this, with thick fluid that is not clear. Either way, you can still see that the contents are homogeneous, and this is a very, very thick fluid that takes a very long time to move because it is so thick, but it's still homogeneous. There's only one single substance in these test tubes. That's what homogeneous means. The third level of consistency is called heterogeneous or complex. The words heterogeneous and complex both mean that there is more than one substance in the ovarian swelling. It may contain both liquid and solid material. It may contain more than one kind of liquid material or more than one kind of solid material. A heterogeneous or complex ovarian swelling contains a variety of substances. Here, I have a test tube depicting the contents of a heterogeneous or complex ovarian swelling. Let's see, there's some thin fluid, there's some thick fluid, there are some solid components, and there's some debris, all here in the same tube. Mishmash. And finally, the fourth level of consistency is solid. A solid ovarian swelling contains only solid material, like this. Completely solid, nothing fluid in there at all. And generally speaking, the more solid an ovarian swelling, the more likely it is to be malignant. So each increase in level of consistency increases the degree of aggression or differentiation. If we add that classification scheme to our chart, it looks like this. Now you see that I've merged the homogeneous and the heterogeneous consistencies into the moderate range to correspond with the moderately aggressive and moderately differentiated category. But you also see that the more solid the ovarian swelling, the more serious it is in terms of severity. But still another way of grading epithelial ovarian cancers is by their degree of malignant potential. This classification designates them as benign, borderline, or malignant. A benign ovarian swelling is confined to the ovary, has well-defined borders between the abnormal cells and the normal cells, is slow growing, and is treatable with surgery alone. A borderline ovarian swelling is one that contains malignant cells that have not invaded the surrounding tissues. In other words, it contains cancer cells that have not yet behaved like cancer cells. These are also called ovarian tumors of low malignant potential because they're unlikely to ever become malignant. And a malignant ovarian swelling is not confined to the ovary, does not have well-defined borders between the abnormal cells and the normal cells, is not slow-growing, and is not treatable with surgery. This is yet another attempt to determine the degree of severity by macroscopic rather than microscopic means. If we add this classification scheme to our chart, we get this. So now you see that I've added benign to the mild category, borderline to the moderate category, and malignant to the severe category. All of these classification schemes are forms of ranking, and they are all consistent with the fact that epithelial ovarian cancer ranks as most deadly. And there you have it. 4 different classification schemes for grading alone. Remember, despite attempts to designate grade macroscopically, all of these are ultimately determined on the microscopic level. None of these designations is finalized until after you've had your surgery and the final pathology report is in. When it comes to epithelial ovarian cancer, the vast majority are in the red column of poorly differentiated, solid, malignant grade. You already know that the kind of epithelial ovarian cancer that constitutes 85% of ovarian cancers and is the most deadly is serous epithelial ovarian cancer. I taught you that in video number 419. So these have been named high-grade serous carcinomas, or HGSCs. If we add that designation to our chart, it belongs here in the last column. This partially explains why these cancers are so deadly. The vast majority of them are this most aggressive, worst kind of grade of cancer. But this ranking system also taps into our next topic of this video, which is staging. So let's talk about stage. Stage refers to how far the cancer has spread. So it's all about which organs it has invaded. And it is primarily on a macroscopic level. Of course, there can be microscopic implants of cancer in an organ, and if so, their presence does indeed change the stage of the cancer. But for purposes of understanding the basic difference between grade and stage, you can think of grading as microscopic and staging as macroscopic. Most likely, upon entering the abdomen at the time of surgery, the surgeon will be able to tell just by looking at the organs which ones are invaded by the cancer. Cancer is very disrespectful of normal anatomy. The organs that have been invaded by the cancer typically will not appear normal. As with other cancers, epithelial ovarian cancer has a staging system. It uses a system developed by the Fédération Internationale of Gynecology and Obstetrics, commonly known as FIGO or FIGO. The most current version is the 2012 version. It is significantly different from previous versions, but only with regard to the nitty-gritty details. Now, describing a cancer staging system is always somewhat boring. So I'm going to try to simplify it rather than dwell on the details. My simplified FIGO staging system is as follows. Stage 1 is confined to your ovaries. Stage 2 is confined to your pelvic organs. Stage 3 is spread beyond your pelvis. And stage 4 is distant metastasis. Of course, as you might imagine, each of these has much more specific details, and each is subdivided into A, B, and C designations. The whole staging system is extremely complex. If you have epithelial ovarian cancer, you need to know the nitty-gritty details. But for this education, the basic system will suffice. We can make a chart of the basics to use as we move forward in this unit. The chart is extremely simple, with stage in the left column and extent of spread in the right column. The big problem with epithelial ovarian cancer is the stage at which symptoms occur. They occur too late to permit an early diagnosis. If I add symptoms to our staging chart, we get this. So now you see that symptoms only alert you to the presence of epithelial ovarian cancer when it is very advanced and has already invaded your ovaries, the organs in your pelvis, including your uterus, fallopian tubes, bowels, bladder, the organs beyond your pelvis, including your liver and spleen. In other words, when it's already metastatic. And here's the biggest problem of all. The vast majority of epithelial ovarian cancers are not detected until stage 3 or stage 4. This is yet another reason it's ranked most deadly. And once again, this goes back to the saran wrap. Remember this? This represents serous epithelial ovarian cancer. That doggone saran wrap covers everything in your abdomen and pelvis. So it's like this on our pelvic model. Here's a model of the pelvis, and this cancer-studied saran wrap just covers it all. Here are the statistics on the percentage of epithelial ovarian cancers diagnosed at each stage added to our chart. A full 80% of them are diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4. This is horrible! And that's what makes it rank as the most deadly of cancers. So you can see that the norm is for both grade and stage to be very advanced from the start. This makes absolutely everything about this cancer dismal. This adds up to a truly dismal prognosis for epithelial ovarian cancer. Overall, to put it bluntly, the bottom line is this. The later the stage and the higher the grade, the sooner you're dead. I'm sorry, but sometimes there just is no way to put a positive spin on a negative thing. I really hate to leave you feeling completely demoralized at the end of any video. So I'm going to tell you a story that really mirrors what you've learned here today, but isn't so demoralizing. I attended college at Rice University, Now, Rice University is a very small, very elite institute in Houston, Texas. Some people call it Harvard of the South, and that's because its student body is nothing but nerds, like me. There are only about 2,000 students attending Rice University at any one time, and almost all of them ranked at the top of their high school graduation class. Almost all are national merit scholars, and almost all have sky-high standardized test scores. Nearly everyone who attends Rice becomes a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. The typical first-year classes for freshmen include calculus, chemistry, physics, just for the start, just as basics. So academics and excellence are pretty much all that exists at Rice. It's definitely not a party school. I don't think I recall ever going to a party at Rice. In any case, there was one advanced genetics course that had the reputation for being the hardest course on campus. And being the science lover that I am, I decided to take it. I know. What was I thinking? Well, the professor was absolutely brilliant. So brilliant that his lectures were just mind-blowing with regard to the difficulty of the material as well as his facility with it. Genetics is really, really magnificent. It involves genetic traits that are dominant and recessive, plus all the multiple possible outcomes, plus incredibly complex statistics. And they're all juxtaposed upon one another in all sorts of intricate ways, and I found it extremely fascinating. Well, the professor gave only 2 exams the entire semester, so the entire grade was based on only those 2 exams. There were no homework assignments, no presentations, no papers, nothing but those 2 exams. And the rumor was that the average score on his exams was very low. Well, I had the audacity to assume that low meant 75 or 80. I mean, at Rice, most students are used to acing most, if not all, tests. And there was no curve for grading that limited the number of perfect scores like there is in law school. I mean, if everyone made an A, then fine, everybody made an A. All that matters is that you actually earned the A. Well, halfway through the semester, we had our first of the 2 exams. And the average score for the entire class was a 28. 28? I didn't even know scores went that low. How could a class of smart honor students have an average score of 28? The highest score on the exam was a 40. I got a 35. We were all just mortified. What we didn't know is that this professor intentionally made his exams virtually impossible. He was actively looking for the geniuses in the group. And obviously, in our group, there were none. He tested us with genetic mysteries that were complete enigmas to world-class geneticists. And he was looking for that rare Einstein mind that could explain anything. It was his very goal to make failure the norm for mere mortals like us. And boy, did he. But ultimately, he graded on a curve. So he adjusted the scores such that the highest scores represented A's and on down the scale. And despite my mortification, I really did love that class. And I made an A. I know, I'm weird. But I think epithelial ovarian cancer is similar. The norm is to make the diagnosis when it's the late advanced stage of the disease. It's almost as if early stages of this disease exist only when it is found accidentally or incidentally, as an occult cancer, like I explained last week. The final charts of grading and staging are your summary, and you can access them both by going to menopausetailor.me or by clicking the link in the description box just below this screen. And we will use the staging chart for future videos to address treatment and prognosis. I'll talk about treatment in the very next video, and I'll talk about prognosis in the video after that. I'm so glad you're learning all this stuff. As you can see, it can truly save your life. That's why I'll do whatever it takes to give you the menopause education you deserve. So please go to menopausetailor.me and schedule a consultation. All women benefit from consultations no matter what their situation. Subscribe here before leaving and stalk me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I will see you in a week. Bye, my dears.